need to recover over 6 trillion naira ground rent due to federal government that is laying fallow in the hands of few individuals in Nigeria. Mr. President, the Senate notes that Section 49 subsection 1 and 51 subsection 2 of the Land Use Act vested ownership rights of the federal government over its land in state territories. The right includes the power to control and regulate town planning and physical development in relation to such land, and by extension, prescribing and collection of any tax, fee, or rate. Disturb that as far back as 1992, when some of these houses were built and allocated to the beneficiaries, none has evidence of payment of ground rent on their property. Aware that federal government have built and allocated over 2 million houses across the 36 states of the Federation, including Federal Capital Territory. The Senate further aware, with the current revenue challenges facing the country, there is need for government to look into other means of generating income other than relying on income generated by oil to defray expenses. Therefore, the Senate resolves to constitute an ad hoc committee to investigate the nonchalant attitude of the officials of the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing on this noble source of income to the federal government. Number 2, sir, investigate the circumstances that led to the non-functioning of the Land Use and Allocation Committee, saddled with the responsibility and handling information, purchase, rent, and or lease matters. Number 3, come up with the comprehensive data of federal government properties that are sold out to the public under the Ministry of Works and Housing across the country. Finally, sir, report back to the Senate within 3 weeks for further legislative action. I thank you very much.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I am Senator George Thompson Sekiwo. I rise to second the motion, and in seconding it, permit me to make a very few comments. Mr. President, if this motion had come 3-4 months ago, I think the Senate would generate much more capacity to work on it. If somebody is owing you 6 trillion naira, from whichever source the money are lodged and we have not gotten them, I think we don't mind even converting ourselves to be revenue officers and look for this money. I say so because for the past 2-3 years, it's been difficult to fund our national budget. And every time we resort to other borrowing money from other sources, either internally or from outside. And meanwhile, one of the sources where government can raise money is using our landed property. And if people are giving landed property and they are to pay ground rent, and they are not paying, and according to the motion, that debt has risen up to about 6 trillion naira. It is something that we have to really crack our brain and think about. I think that, first, I think that the federal government is supposed to have a computerized system where all such lands are located and in whose name. And I also believe that they should be able to know those who have not paid the money, not why they have not paid, those who have not paid, and then have a method of getting this money. Mr. President, in other climate, when you even go to market and use a card to buy something on credit, as they pay you your salary, they deduct from source. Nigeria have not created a system where debtors, those who are owing money, can be approached and take money from them. Even to pay electricity bill is difficult. Now you see we are paying because you pay as you go. So we are paying. Before, many people don't pay electricity bill. But now if you don't pay, when that last unit gets up, no light. No person will ask you. You will use your own leg and move to the office and pay and obtain it. So I think we should get a system to control our revenue collection methods. We should need to have a system. If you don't, then we are going to have a problem. So, Mr. President, in a whole, I completely second and support the motion that the prayers he has brought in, let them have a resolution of them, and then start working now, so that before we leave, we are leaving very soon, so that before we leave in May, we will have left a very good legacy on revenue generation for the country. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Benue Northeast. Mr. President, why agreeing totally with the mover of the motion that there's need for us to generate more revenue wherever we'll find them, there are issues that I think the mover of the motion needs to clarify. First, those lands are federal government lands that were allocated to federal government by the state. If they are sold to individuals, it is no longer the responsibility of the federal government to collect ground rent on them. It is for the state and not the federal government. That is, if they are sold. Because if an individual in a state purchase a piece of land, because most of these lands, like for instance, the railway lands, across the nation, they were sold to individuals. Once that land is sold to an individual, it's no longer federal government lands. It reverts back to the state. And so the federal government cannot collect ground rent on them. I want that clarified. And if that is the case, we move to the issue of data. Federal government can only collect rent on lands that they have rented out those that are properties to individuals. So those issues are issues that I think if if the Senate agreed to constitute a committee that will look into it, those are the issues that will be considered. Otherwise, for us to just assume that there's 6 trillion somewhere, what is the basis of the data? How did they arrive at that 6 trillion? Because most of this land have been sold and no longer belong to federal government, and so those ground rent will no longer go to federal government, he has alluded to. And so we will support the generation of revenue from such sources, but we must be certain what we're talking about, not just raising that huge amount of money when in actual sense we might not necessarily have that. Mr. President, I so submit.
Maybe I
rise to contribute on this very important motion. It was brought here 2 months ago, and we argued that land belonging to federal government, if it is sold, then it ceased to be the responsibility of the federal government. It has now been transferred to the states. But only yesterday, the mover of this motion brought us the Land Use Act, and it is clearly stated that rent is collectible even after the property is being sold. And here in FCT, over 2 million houses were sold to civil servants. And most of these houses, the owners are not paying rent. In Lagos, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the same thing is also happening. The Land Use Act allows federal government to still continue collecting the rent. And I'm sure the mover of the motion will state the sections of the Land Use Act that allows the federal government to be collecting rent. So the only problem, Mr. President, with this motion is that there are some states that are equally collecting rent, and it will amount to double taxation. Maybe perhaps if the committee is formed, it should look into ways and means of avoiding double taxation, because it will not be fair for both the federal government and the state government to be collecting the rent. So, in essence, I support this motion, and I urge all my colleagues to support it. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Senator
Aliu Sabi Abdullahi, Niger North. Mr. President, let me align myself with the last speaker. However, the very important point we need to note is that the collection of ground rent is by state and local government depending on the classification of the land. If the land is classified as urban, it is the state government that collects that. But if it is rural, it is the local government. And I make this statement because I'm aware a time in which my local government was collecting rent because of the Kanji Dam. The Kanji Dam is located in Borgu local government, and over time, the Nigerian military formations also, they have period in which the local government, they have a consultant who will follow up and collect a cumulative sum on behalf of the local government. So because of that, I believe what he's saying with respect to what Senator Aleru said in the FCT, that is correct. The FCT belongs to the federal government. And I think within that context, the federal government, the houses that were sold, I was a beneficiary of one of the houses that were sold, and I knew I was paying ground rent to FCT. They normally send a demand note, and you have to go and pay. So that is an aspect that we can look at. But with respect to the state, actually, when a land is allocated to federal government, the federal government is supposed to even pay ground rent to the state. And if it's local government, you are supposed to pay to the local government. So I think this is a point that we must look at. I agree when the committee is set up, they should go and look at the fine details of what is possible for the federal and what is possible for the state or even local government. Because it depends on the categorization of the land. I so submit, and I support that we should allow this committee to be set up to bring the fine details of all of these issues for us. Thank you.
Ibikunle Amosun, I represent N6trn. Mr. President, first let me commend the mover of this motion, that any initiative that will bring us the much needed revenue to the federal purse should be encouraged. But having said that, I want to toe the line of Senator Suzwan. I remember that, yes, I even engaged the mover of the motion, explaining to him that once the federal government ceases to be the legitimate owner of such land, if it is sold, I agree with them that if it is FCT, of course, it is still federal government. But any of those land in any of our states in Nigeria, once the federal government sold that land to either individual, maybe even agencies, the ground rent becomes payable to the state in which the land is. The thing that I would want to suggest is that when the committee is put together, let them now liaise with the mover of this motion to see those lands that falls within the FCT, and we can go for that. But those ones that are in other states that the federal government has sold, they do not have any lien on the land anymore to be collecting such ground rent. I so submit, Mr. President. Thanks.
Senator Muhammad Sani Musa, representing Niger East. Just as the last speaker said, and Senator Alero, I think even in the FCT today, if you look at it, the area councils usually send bills for ground rent almost every year to houses, to occupants of residential houses within FCT. And the same thing when you go back to the states, apart from the one that the local government receives, if it is a federal property, I think the controller of Minister of Works, I'm not sure, but I know that those allocated federal houses in the state, they usually also receive letters requesting for those ground rents. So if this thing is streamlined and effectively checked, I think it's another source of revenue for the country. But the motion given today, I doubt if there will be 6 trillion somewhere that has not been received, because some of us have been paying this ground rent in FCT, and I don't know how it is being accounted for. That is my submission, sir.
Senator, I remain Senator Sam Egwu, representing Ebonyi North Central District. I wish to support this motion, but want to contribute on a different part of the request, of the prayers, why the ministry has not been able to collect this money or have data, like somebody suggested. Mr. President, the Ministry of Works, Lands and Housing is like a vehicle that is overloaded and cannot move. As the chairman of the Senate Committee on Lands and Housing, I have observed, or my committee have observed, that the lumping of works with that of housing has created a major problem, that anything concerning lands and housing appears to be submerged in that ministry. 70 or 80% of the allocation has always gone to the works aspect of that ministry. In all our activities, it appears that the lands and ministry aspect of the ministry is almost non-existent. And I feel that works alone is a major activity that deserves a separate ministry. Why lands and houses should have a separate ministry? And if that has happened, then a lot of job that needed to be done along the lands and housing will now get its proper attention. As of today, they don't have the capacity. And I think that that's one of the major factors, that even if you leave them as they are now, the same issue will continue. So my submission and my contribution is that in as much as I support this wonderful motion for us to form a committee to recover this huge amount that is lying fallow among some few Nigerians, we should also try to do something. Maybe the executive and next incoming government should be able to look into this area of separating works from lands and houses, so that these two ministries are major ministries that should be able to contribute to the development of this country. So I also submit, Mr. President. Senator Ablaha, there is an amendment on the floor already, and we have to vote on it. The new prayer one. Please let me put the question first, because someone moved the motion, another person seconded, so we have to vote on it. All this, I don't think that's what I said, because you wanted to adopt my own. My own, I didn't say inability. I said the reasons why they could not collect. So this one is going to be your own amendment, not my own. So, constitute another committee to investigate the inability of the officials, no, not officials, of the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing. It's as an institution. On this, no, not refusal, please. And housing on this noble source of income. Do we need all this? Do we need this noble source of income, blah, blah? Yeah, I think we don't have to use any adjective to describe the,
So how do you want it to be? We should take it out. Okay, we still have to do some surgery here. Constitute another committee to investigate the inability of the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing to collect the ground rent. I think that should be. Yes. Okay. So, Secretary, take note. Those in favor. We are on prayer one. Prayer one. Those in favor of prayer one as amended, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it. Please, Secretary, you need to get this right. Prayer two. Investigate the circumstances that led to the non-functioning of the Land Use and Allocation Committee. How did you know that? I think it's when you investigate what happened is then you know.
Sir, what I'm saying here is that, you know,
Can we allow the committee, our standing committee, to investigate that as part of its work? Because this our ad hoc committee will have too much and they may not even be able to finish it. Because we have just barely 2 months. So if we allow our standing, which committee is supervising housing? But if we think we can lump it up with this, we can. But I think it will be too much. But we will give the standing committee also time limit. Because what he said is very important. These people who are selling the houses, we don't know how far they have gone. So maybe, in fact, your own should be 2 weeks. You need 4 weeks. The Senator Jika, sorry I preempted you, but if you want, we can still make it part of this. Is that your desire? I want someone to second it then. Distinguished Senator. Yes, Tolu Odebi, I saw your hand. Okay, this is an additional prayer. No. Senator Tolu is protected. So, please, distinguished colleagues, he knows what he seconded. And chairman of the Committee on Housing will be a member of this ad hoc committee. So he will facilitate that aspect of the job. So those in favor of the additional prayer by the distinguished Senator Halori Jika, say aye. The ayes have it. Why? I didn't hear any name. Bas. Senator Mohammed Adam Aleru, chairman. Senator Mohammed San Musa, member. Senator Sam Egu, member. Senator Smart Ademi, member. Senator Michael Opemi Bamidele, member. We need someone in with low background. Senator Betty Apiafi to give the other touch. And then the sponsor of the motion, Senator Yusuf A. Yusuf. And we are giving you 1 month, 4 weeks. 4 weeks to report back to the Senate in plenary. 4 weeks. Leader of the Senate.